I've been a freelance land surveyor for about 18 years. Most of my work is solo remote stuff. I'm usually camping out for days at a time in places nobody else is going to. I actually prefer it that way. Or at least I used to. This happened about 5 years ago. I'd been hired to survey boundary markers on a parcel up in the mountains near the Clearwater Wilderness. Remote doesn't even begin to describe it. It was 5 miles of hiking just to reach where I set up camp. I filed my route with the local ranger station like I always do, and I packed a week's worth of supplies. The first day went smooth. I found 3 markers, logged everything, and made it back to camp before dark. The forecast had called for cold and light snow, and that's pretty much what I got. By the second day, though, things started to change. We got way more snow than expected. The next marker was only about a mile out of the way, so instead of calling it right then and there, I figured, what the hell? That was a mistake. I honestly still think about how stupid it was not to just hunker down or make it out of the woods when I had a chance. The terrain was all hidden rocks and icy slopes under fresh snow. So, to translate, the worst possible conditions to hike through. I was picking my way down a short embankment when my boot hit a patch of ice I never saw. One wrong step like that and you could die. And I mean that literally. I slid probably 10 to 15 feet before catching myself on a tree root. I was lucky not to have slid further, but the pain in my right ankle was instant. I tried to tell myself I was fine, but the moment I stood up, I audibly groaned in pain. I couldn't put much weight on that leg, and I knew it would be a few hours before I'd be able to walk normally. I was so mad at myself, but there was nothing I could do. I abandoned the rest of the work right there. No marker was worth getting stranded over. I painfully made my way back uphill to the main trail and started the slow hike back toward camp. After a few minutes, I noticed boot tracks on the trail, which seemed to have come from further into the woods on my left. They were heading in the same direction I was going, and they looked somewhat fresh, which I could tell by how sharp the edges were despite the snowfall. I figured it was probably a hunter, or maybe someone from the landowner's crew checking on the property. It's not unusual to cross paths with people out there, even in remote areas. I didn't think much of it. I just kept moving, trying to keep as much weight off my ankle as possible. As the light started fading, I began hearing sounds behind me. At first, I chalked it up to normal forest noises, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I kept turning around and looking over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything. That part of the forest was pretty dense, so if something was out there, there was a good chance I wouldn't be able to see it anyway. I stopped walking, and the sound didn't stop right away. There was a delay of maybe 4 or 5 seconds. Then it stopped. I froze and tried to listen for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing beyond the wind and snow. I started walking again, and for a bit the footsteps didn't resume, so I thought everything was fine. But a few minutes later, I heard them again. I kept turning around, but I still couldn't see anything. It was especially unsettling because I knew I wouldn't be able to run if there was a real threat out there. That was the worst part. Then I heard something metallic off to my left. I don't really know how to describe it. It was this low sound, like something lightly hitting metal. It was strange, because there wasn't supposed to be anything out there but trees. So I had no idea what could be making that kind of sound. The sound distracted me just enough that I realized I hadn't been keeping track of those footprints I noticed earlier. I looked down, and they were gone. I turned around trying to see where they had branched off or turned, but I couldn't figure it out. That's when I noticed something else. Another set of footprints, coming out of the tree line on my left, running parallel to mine through the snow. They weren't far away. Whoever had been ahead of me on that trail was now walking alongside me through the trees. At that point, I was so on edge that I wasn't thinking straight. I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have just kept moving. But instead, I called out, asking if anyone was there. I didn't get an answer. After about a minute or two of waiting, I knew I had to get out of there. But my ankle was still killing me, so I couldn't move fast. I wanted to run, or at least jog, but I couldn't. I was pretty close to camp, though, so I just told myself that if I kept moving, I'd be fine. I wasn't hearing footsteps behind me anymore, which should have been a good sign. But it didn't feel like one, because I knew there was someone out there. I was really close to my sight when I heard the sound of a heavy branch snapping from somewhere behind me. It wasn't subtle. It didn't sound natural. Something with weight had stepped on it. I didn't stop moving. I just kept thinking that if I could make it back, I'd be okay. Eventually, I did reach my campsite. It was fully dark at that point, but only after getting inside my tent did I realize I wasn't any safer in there than I had been out on the trail. I started packing immediately. My ankle made it hard to move quickly, but I tried my best to rush. Before I even finished packing, I heard the thing I had been dreading the whole time. Footsteps. Right outside the tent. I froze. The footsteps weren't approaching. They were circling. Slow, steady, just walking around the tent. There was nothing I could do but wait. It went on for what felt like 10 minutes before everything suddenly went quiet. I hadn't heard whoever was out there walk away, but I didn't care. I was leaving. I finished packing, took a deep breath, and unzipped my tent. The moment I stepped outside and looked toward the trees, I screamed. There was a man standing at the tree line, staring at me. He was really old and sickly looking, thin, pale, almost like he was dying. Something about him just looked off. I froze, staring back at him. I honestly thought he was going to charge me, but he didn't. I put my hands up and said, "I don't want any trouble." He didn't respond. We just stood there for a few seconds, maybe longer. Then he finally said something. "You're a lucky man." His voice was flat, emotionless, and then he turned and disappeared into the woods. The rest of that night is pretty blurry, partly because of the pain in my ankle and partly because of what had just happened. If that guy had wanted to hurt me, he probably could have. There would have been nothing I could have done. I finished packing and left, not even caring that it was dark. When I eventually got checked out, I was told I had severely sprained my ankle. They said it was a miracle I hadn't made it worse by walking on it. I reported the man, but I knew nothing was going to come of it. I still do remote work. It's my livelihood, and I'm good at it. But I don't camp alone on winter assignments anymore. Either I bring someone with me or I turn the job down. Because that's still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me.